Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Ultra Rare Podcast. It is October 21st, and we've got some pretty fun boxes today. PokeDoku was a really good time, a really good custom grid. I love this a lot, and the PokeGrid for today was excellent, but I'm a little somber in my heart, and we'll get to that later. But today's Doku made by Xgigglypuff, who's a cosplayer, among other things, like 60,000 followers on Twitter. It's the extent of my research. Great grid, though. I mean, I really love this, honestly. Top row, we have Fairy, Dual Type, and Monotype. And for side row, we have Evolved by Friendship, Gen 9, basically, and Mega Evolved. This has, one glaring issue, which is, of course, Evolved by Friendship. Definitely a hiccup, but we'll get over it a little bit. I didn't get over it. I missed a box, but we'll get there. Let's just start. We have Fairy Evolved by Friendship. Excuse me. This one is difficult, to say the least. One interesting pattern you'll see in this Evolved by Friendship Fairy thing is these are all, besides Sylveon, which is the one I picked, and by far the most common, they are all middle evolutions. Togetic, Jigglypuff, Clefairy, and Marill. Because remember, this is the result. This is the result of a friendship evolution. That's how Doku does it. So Togetic, Jigglypuff, Clefairy, Marill, obviously all middle evolutions, and all evolved by friendship, which I thought is really interesting, and also I would never guess in a million years, right? Like, that just seems so out of place for the line. I would just imagine friendship comes at the end, but for these it did not. To be honest, I had no idea Jigglypuff evolved by friendship, and no idea Marill evolved by friendship. Clefairy and Togetic I remembered after the fact, but pretty difficult one. I just went Sylveon because all the EV forms evolved via friendship. Not all of them, obviously, but a lot. It's a rough box. However, it was the most achieved box out of all of the evolved by friendship ones. I think because Sylveon is maybe just like a go-to, and when you have monotype evolved by friendship, it's difficult to find that expression, but there is actually more, which is interesting. Anywho, Fairy evolved by friendship, pretty difficult on that one, honestly. Infer things, I don't know, cute Pokemon, right? I would have never gotten Togetic, but Jigglypuff, Clefairy, Marill, I can kind of understand this. And I really wish Doku didn't have, because you can tell when you search things up in Doku, there's a lot of things that interfere with searching up random answers. Like in PokeGrid, if you type in random letters, you will just get the very first Pokemon that, have those letters. But in Doku, they're smart and they know what you're doing, and you have to type in random letters and you'll get like a list of 4, and it kind of sucks. So this is a really difficult one to do in Doku, and I'd be very proud of yourself if you were one of the 85% to get one, and certainly if you were one of the people to get anything that wasn't Sylveon. Don't be ashamed if you got Sylveon, though, because at least you got the box. And on Doku, score isn't really that much of an important thing if there's no leaderboards. Next up, we have Fairy Paldea. This one's pretty simple. There's tons. There's the most popular was Screamtail, which is actually a great pick. I'd consider that. I probably would have picked that over what I picked, and it was shockingly 5% more popular. Screamtail, Fluttermane. Fluttermane's kind of obvious. I don't know if a lot of people playing PokeDoku are big into VGC, but obviously Fluttermane was huge in VGC. Super popular. Fido, Dashbun, I would have had no idea. I picked Iron Valiant, who's the only fairy fighting type. Tinkatun, Tinkatink, and Tikatuff. And the least common was Fezandipity, which I love that pick. Fezandipity is a fairy poison or a fairy fighting type. Nope, fairy poison, because Iron Valiant's the only fairy fighting. Fairy poison type, and a really interesting pick. I love Fezandipity here. I think no matter when you pick that, that's going to be always a super duper great pick. But, I mean, Paradoxes too, they never really go wrong. Screamtail and Fluttermane, this is really the only time I've ever seen Paradoxes go poorly. But Iron Valiant was like Paradox, and it did great. I think this one's just, ugh. I mean, I think the only real obvious ones are the Tinks and maybe Fido if you're knowledgeable about that. But I certainly am not knowledgeable about Fido and Dashbun. They are great though. I do love them. Next up, we have what, Fairy Mega Evolved. There's a couple of these. Most common was Gardevoir, which is pretty obvious. Everyone kind of knows Gardevoir, but there's actually 5. Gardevoir, Audino, Altaria, Diancie, and Mawile were the 5 Mega Fairies. This actually, there's really not much advice I can give you here because surprisingly, Gardevoir Mega wasn't that common. Like, I think Gardevoir Mega isn't a very, and no offense if you pick Gardevoir Mega, it's not a very sophisticated pick. I mean, it's most common for a reason. Gardevoir is a fairy type, and it's a pretty obvious Mega. Like, it's a Mega that comes to my mind very quickly. So it doesn't feel like an incredibly impressive pick, but something like Altaria, who in its base form is not a fairy type, and gains its flying type is replaced by the fairy type. It's the only dragon fairy, and I think Mega Altaria is awesome. But even that's only 2% less than Gardevoir. Like, this really isn't. This is a category where if you pick something, you're kind of just doing great. Mega Mawile, of course, a fairy steel type. I don't know why I say of course. That's not immediately obvious. One of the only fairy steel types, the best typing in the game, maybe, in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinion. But Diancie, also a super creative one. There's, for only 5 here, there's a lot that I can be impressed by. And there's a lot that you can think of. Just start thinking Mega, Mega, Mega. See what you can find. Audino is great. Audino is specifically is way more common than I thought it would. I really, really love that pick. Moving on from the fairies, now we're on to dual type, which is always fun because there's just so much you can do with dual type. It's so much expression. There's a million dual types. So a dual type evolved by friendship. Even though I just said there's a million of them, couldn't tell you one that evolves by friendship. This is the one box I missed, and I don't really blame myself. There's only one of these who I think, yeah, that one would have worked. And that's Crobat, which was the second most common, right behind Lucario. I had no idea Lucario evolved by friendship. I knew Crobat did. Well, I know now. Roselia had no idea. Togetic, Leavanny, Swoobat, Jigglypuff, Marill, and Frostmoth were all of our picks today. Couldn't have guessed in a million years Frostmoth evolved from friendship. But the more you know. And that's really my best advice as a pod host I can give you here. The more you know. I have only ever done 1 Dex in full, so I'm not super versed in how Pokemon evolved. And also, all of my knowledge from Pokemon doesn't really come from the game itself. And these evolved by friendship things are, the game itself. I tend to base my thinking more in outside sources like competitive or other media. And, I mean, most of my knowledge as far as this comes, I've just done so many grids and Dokus that's where I get my knowledge from. But if you play the games a lot more than me, you would know Frostmoth and Marill and Jigglypuff and Swoobat and Leavanny are all evolved by friendship. It just really one of those things where it just suits your strengths, and sometimes evolved by friendship isn't going to be your strength, and that's okay. That's okay. It's okay to miss a box on a Doku here and there. Or multiple, because sometimes Doku just kicks you in the ass. Moving on to, finally away from evolved by friendship, dual type Paldea. There's a trillion of them. Surprisingly, though, only 88% of people got this box, which I find kind of shocking because do we just not know Gen 9s? I'm not sure. Learn Gen 9s. Play Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. God knows I didn't, and I suffer for it all the time. But there's so many amazing picks here. Chin Pao, Arctivax, Frigivax, Tinglu, and Chi-Yu are the least common of the 5. But these are all literally, there's so many that Chi-Yu's 4 people guessed Chi-Yu. Like, 4 people, that's what we're dividing against. The most common was 4.4 as Meowscarda. Skeleturge wasn't far behind, but surprisingly, Quaquaval was actually not, I mean, it was like 3% less than Skeleturge and Meowscarda. Some other ones were Iron Bundle, Tinkaton, Iron Hands. Those are some of the most common. You'll see that while I generally recommend using paradoxes will always put you in the middle of the road. There's no paradox that's going to be super popular, but a lot of the time, enough people know paradoxes to where they aren't going to be the super rare ones. Super rare ones are going to be stuff like Chi-Yu and Ting-Lu and Frigibax. Toadscruel, I love that. Baxcalibur, Palmo, Diplin, Wo-Chin, Arcalodon, Tatsugiri, Ogerpon, Wellspring. I mean, there's just so many great picks. I went with Golden Go, which is admittedly, number 1,000. It's not a very sophisticated pick. And all I can top that up to is I just didn't think about it enough. I should have just thought, well, I can do better than Golden Go. And you, great listener, can do better than Golden Go. When you think of something, you don't always have to put it immediately. And, sometimes I make mistakes too. As your host, I can admit I make mistakes. And I think Golden Go is a mistake. But a mistake, again, by a margin of 1%, because there are just so many picks here that anything you pick is going to be a fine pick. Pretty easy one. Moving on to dual type Mega Evolve. This is also a pretty easy one because we'll get into it later when we talk about mono Mega Evolved. Most Mega Evolves get 2 types. If you're a Pokemon that is a monotype and you get a Mega, a lot of times you will gain a type to make you dual type. And that was my pick today. Ampharos Mega. Electric Dragon, one of the only electric dragons, and also way more common than I thought it would be, which makes me a little sad. But, I mean, most Megas are dual type. I thought Sceptile, but then I remembered, you know what? Sceptile is a grass dragon type. I mean, I thought Sceptile on the mono one. Again, we'll get to it later. Sceptile gains a dragon type. Like, they just do things like that to kind of make your life difficult. But most Megas are dual type. Some of the least common were Latios and Latios Mega, which makes sense because it's 2 forms. But some other ones, a great one was Steelix or Medicham. And everyone kind of knows Steelix is dual type, but you just don't even think of Steelix. So, again, dig deep. I thought I dug deep with Ampharos, but whatever. Sometimes you dig deep and it just won't work out. This is a really fun one, and a lot of these were pretty darn rare. I just happened to go really common. But, I mean, the most common was Charizard Mega X, which was only 7%. Again, anything in dual type is going to be a pretty small margin unless it's something crazy like Evolve by Friendship. They're all going to be pretty tiny percentages. Moving on now to Evolved by Friendship Monotype. Again, I didn't know what to do. I am currently playing Pokemon Go, actually, and I'm evolving an Eevee with Friendship. So I knew that Umbreon was evolved by Friendship. Also Espeon, but apparently 5% or 1.3 thousand people thought of Umbreon before Espeon. A little salty about that. Anyway, some other great picks were Pikachu, which a lot of people might not know. The most rare Persian Alola, Chimicho, Clefairy, Silvally is an amazing one. Blissey, Snorlax, Lopunny. A lot of great picks here. I mean, once you get up to Blissey, Snorlax, and Lopunny, you start to get a little bit more on the common side. But again, 79% of people guess this box. That is an extremely low score, the lowest on this Doku, and I understand it completely. I mean, even with something with so much less answers, like Fairy Evolved by Friendship, in exchange for less answers, you get Sylveon, a super duper obvious one. But there's not a lot of super duper obvious monotype Evolved by Friendships that aren't, Sylveon. I mean, Sylveon was in this one too, which again shocks me because everyone knows Sylveon goes in the Fairy, but maybe it's because everyone used Sylveon in the Fairy so they couldn't use it in mono. I'm not sure. The percentages are a cool stat, but they are a little confusing because I can't really pinpoint why. Moving on, I don't know. Again, who knows how I can teach you how to know what evolves by Friendship. Play the games, you'll know. Gen 9, Paldea Monotype. Pretty, simple here. Name a Paldea Pokemon and it has a good chance of being Monotype. Ogerpon Base is a super fun one. I really like that one. The most common was Fuecoco. Next up was Sprigatito, and Quaxley was near behind, but Lechonk actually beat it out a little bit. Ogerpon's a fun pick, but that's actually pretty common. There's some very rare picks. Houndstone, Tadbulb, Satitan, Dunsparce, Wugtrio, Knacklestack, Nimble, my pick, which was Garganacl. And I think when I name these things, if you do know Gen 9, you'll know that or you shouldn't be shocked that any of those are monotype. Yet, listening to this statistically, you probably didn't pick Houndstone or Tadbulb or Titan. That's just a classic case of digging deep. Those are obviously monotypes, but it's not obviously what you're going to think of. I thought of Garganacl just because I play competitive, and Garganacl is one of my favorite competitive Pokemon of all time. I think it's so much fun, and that's just my niche, right? I could have done Knackle Stack. That probably would have been a little bit more, you know, toned down because it's a middle evolution, but who knows? Whatever. Again, it's one of those things where it's so big that as long as you don't play Fuecoco or Sprigatito or Quaxly, you'll be fine. Anything under basically Earthworm anything under Earthworm is under 3%, which is a great victory by you. Dondozo, all 3 Terrapagos forms, Palafin, Finizen, again, Wugtrio, Mastiff, the Dunsparce, Mousehold, all great, really, really fun ones. And moving on to the last one, Mono Mega Evolved, which, when I mentioned before how many Megas get dual types, this one becomes a little difficult. Let's move down the list. We have Blastoise Mega. Is the most common for a reason. It's pretty obvious. Blastoise doesn't get a second typing when it evolves. And does... Oh, Venusaur already has a second typing. I guess so does Charizard. So yeah, Blastoise is the only mono Gen 1 starter, and we all know that they got Megas. Aggron next. Aggron is a super interesting case because I believe it's the only one on this list that actually loses. It might be one of the only Megas that loses a type, not just gets its type replaced. Aggron goes from a rock steel type to a mono steel type, which is also a pretty fun one. If you need a mono steel, Aggron Mega, even though his whole line before him had steel typing, Aggron Mega does not, or had rock typing. Sorry. Aggron Mega, Kangaskhan was another one. My pick, Mega Mewtwo Y. Mega Mewtwo, I knew it was a monotype. Not Mega Mewtwo X, though. That is a psychic fighting type. There was Absol Mega, Manectric Mega, Glalie Mega, which a lot of people think is dark for good reason, Alakazam Mega, and Banette Mega. These are all pretty, in my opinion, obvious that they are, single types. I'm not going to act like this is an obvious box, though. 84% of people got this, and I had to think about this box. Just because Banette and Alakazam are obviously monotypes, and same with Manectric and Absol, doesn't mean that you're going to think of those, right? I certainly didn't. It's a really, really tough box, and you're going to have to really dig deep on your Mega knowledge. I mean, the most, obvious one is Blastoise Mega, and that's still pretty hard to think of. That's kind of your wild card, your safe out, but you're going to have to dig deep if you want a rare one of these, and mine was only rare for just the sake of all of them were kind of rare because no one really knew any. A really, surprisingly challenging box, and Mega Evolved continues to be one of my favorites because it encapsulates such a wide variety of Pokemon, but still narrow enough to kind of have its own niche. There's really nothing like Mega Evolved as a pick, and it gives you this super medium-sized portion of Pokemon to go through. And the thing is with this is that you'll know a lot of Megas. It's just such an anomaly, and it's so cool, and I love getting to express myself with my Mega picks. That's all for Doku, though. I mean, as soon as you get under Evolved by Friendship, it's pretty darn easy. Overall, pretty doable besides, 1 or 2 missed boxes on the top row. And it's one of those things where I really love how PokeGrid gives me that undo to where if I'm really talented at all these other things, I can kind of give myself that chance to redeem myself and get a guess in. But it's okay. It's okay. Let's move on to the grid, which I, again, say somberly, and you'll see why. Let's go. Okay, time for the grid, and I must confess, I remember texting in my group chat, I didn't think I'd be able to record today, simply out of shame. You might not notice immediately. You might think, Mason, this is a pretty good grid. I think you did pretty great here. I love your really excellent top left, and that top middle. I know you stole that one from the leaderboard. I certainly did. But, my little viewer, we're looking at notably a psychic on the top row. A psychic type. And I say with pride at the end of every single one of these I say, study your Necrozma forms. Study them. Of course, they're the same type as Lunala and Solgaleo. And Ultra Necrozma is one of the only psychic dragon types behind the Lotties. And I think that might be it. I say that all the time. I brandish it with pride, but my loyal viewer, I tell you, I didn't think of them once. I did not use the Necrozma forms, and honestly, I'm ashamed, and I'm sorry. As your host, I truly feel if there was someone that I could step down and they could take over the podcast, this would be that moment. Because genuinely, I don't even know how I'm going to be able to record with this level of shame. My psychic type picks, we'll get into them, were Orbeetle, an Undo, an Oricorio Pau style, and Articuno Galarian form. Funny enough, our friend, Fierce Phoenix, here today, actually demonstrated on his grid that every single Necrozma form worked. Of course, weak to ice, Ultra Necrozma is a dragon type, so that one would work. No evolution line, obviously, would have worked for any of them. But most interesting was Necrozma Dawnwings, and probably all of the Necrozmas, actually, yeah, all of them, learn Light Screen. So I could have had a nice Necrozma top row, and I could have said, hey guys, look at my grid. Look how great I am as your podcast host. See what I told you? And look how rare those are. Let's get another look. That's 0.2 on Dawn and 0.8 on Dusk, and 4% on Necrozma, Ultra Necrozma. But you know what I put instead? Sigilyph, the most popular one. So truly, I'm just ashamed, and I'm sorry. I might seem like I'm running this on longer than it needs to be, but I've never been more sad about a grid in my entire life. I'm done. That was my rant. Let's get into it. Can learn Light Screen, weak to ice, no evolution line on the top row, and the side row is Psychic, which all the Necrozma forms are Psychic, Normal, and Electric. Starting in top left, can learn Light Screen, Psychic type. Honestly, I tell you, I looked at the grid, and immediately, I saw it. I saw in my head, a Psychic type. What's the first Psychic type I think of? Dottler. Believe it or not, Dottler. Look him up. Also, use him. Dottler's great. A Bug Psychic type, and a special Bug Psychic. I mean, obviously it's special, so I had a lot of confidence that it would be able to learn Light Screen. I wanted to go a little bit safer, so I picked its greater evolution, because sometimes lower evolutions can't learn those moves. I believe Dottler could learn Light Screen today, but it's not what I went with. I went with Orbeetle, which is still great. Orbeetle was 1%. It was legendary this morning, actually, but now it's ultra rare, which I'm fine with. I'm happy with that. It's, not Necrozma Dawnwings, but I'm happy with that. It's a fine pick. Some Psychic types you could have picked today were Mr. Mime, but let's try to dig a little bit deeper. What's some more popular ones? Solosis and that whole line, Duo, whatever, and I don't remember the names. You know what I'm talking about, the green ones. Indeedee, Grumpig, Bronzong, Hoopa, Slowbro, all of the Slowbro and Slowkings, Girafarig, Farigiraf by extension, Mewtwo and Mega Mewtwo, all the Mega Mewtwo's, the Megalodios. Pretty good day, I'd say. Munna, and whatever Munna's evolution is, the sleeping one. I mean, it's Psychic. Psychic is the Light Screen type. Light Screen is a Psychic type move. Try to think a little bit more defensive when you think Light Screen. What seems like a Light Screen setter? That might guide you in the right direction, but I mean, honestly, I can tell you, you don't have to be that sophisticated. I knew Orbeetle was a Psychic type, and I thought, can probably learn Light Screen. Also, Light Screen is given to a lot of Pokemon, so not an entirely difficult box. It gets a little bit more difficult when we drop down to Normal type. Now, one piece of advice I don't think I've given is, I don't know how to word this without just saying it's this exact graph, but this does come up. If I need Light Screen, or let's say I need a Bug type move, or any type move, right? But the type it's asking for is not that type. Think of a type that has the type you want as a dual type. Normal type that can learn Light Screen you, I don't know. I can't tell you nothing. You know as much as me. Obviously, there's some great ones, Arbulva and Happiny and whatever, Azurill. What I did was I thought of normal psychic types. I didn't think of Farigiraf or Girafarig, which would have worked, but I did think of Indeedee, who is just a single Pokemon. There's a different form for male and female, which inherently gives Indeedee a little bit of rare value because there's two of them. You saw that earlier just on the Doku today with the Lotties. There being two Latios Megas makes them inherently more rare. That also happens with Aegislash. There's a ton of examples where two-form moves are just kind of better for you. So I thought of a normal psychic type. There's, I believe, a few of those, but the Indeedee forms are the one I know the best. Some, again, and I can only tell you the rarest ones, but Cinccino, Weirdeer, which is a great pick. That's also a normal psychic type, I believe. Happiny learns it, which, again, seems rare, but Chansey was the most popular. So Happiny is kind of a natural progression, but as I said with Orbeetle, I didn't know if Dottler could learn Light Screen, so you have to watch out for that. But Happiny isn't a super big reach. Some other great ones were, just Girafarig, and wow, that is all we did that day. Normal. Try to think of normal psychic type. Honestly, I can't recommend much besides that. I'm curious to see how many there are, but I mean, I'm sure a lot of them can. Blissey can. It's a move with so much coverage that a million things could work for it. Now we can learn Light Screen for electric type, and we'll get to my pick. I don't want to talk about my pick yet. Most popular was Raichu, and that's my classic example. And that's, even though it's the most common, it is taking advice from what I just told you. And that's, if you can't think of an electric type that learns Light Screen, think of an electric psychic type. Raichu Alolan, one of my favorite just designs, forms, everything. I love Raichu Alolan. Also an electric psychic type. Makes sense that it learns Light Screen. There was, of course, stupid ones on the leaderboard like Blitzel and Mareep and Regieleki, which is actually a pretty interesting one. Tadbulb, Joltik, Dedenne, Xurkitree. But Xurkitree does make sense. Like, that's a special electric type. I mean, most electric types are special, almost all of them. And if it's not, like Electivire, then it sucks. So that's kind of that was my mindset. I thought, well, electric's kind of just a special thing. And, I mean, Light Screen, if you take anything away from today, it's first of all studying their Necrozma forms. Second of all, Light Screen gets on so many mods. So really try not to be that guy who, again, even though I literally just said to be that guy, don't pick Raichu Alolan, because while it does work, Light Screen gets so much coverage that there's gotta be something better than Raichu Alolan. And there is. I thought Ball Out, I genuinely can't believe I did this. I thought Ball Out Electros, who is a mono electric type, also interesting because he's the only Pokemon without a weakness. He's a straight electric type with Levitate. I thought it's an electric type. That's kind of special. I bet it in both ways. He does look a little special too. I bet it could learn Light Screen, and I did, and it's 0.5%. Like that's better than most of the leaderboard picks. I mean, a lot of those are inflated, but still. Again, you can kind of just ball out on Light Screen, and I'm surprised more people didn't. But Raichu is still a great pick. 12% is high, but that's what you have your own do for. That's why I love the grid. Let's get off Light Screen, move on to Psychic Weak to Ice. If you're... I don't know why I didn't pick Necrozma Ultra, man. Anyway, I picked Sigilyph. I knew of 3 Psychic Flying types. I knew of Sigilyph, I knew of Articuno Galar, and Braviary Hisuian. I wanted to save Articuno Galar for No Evolution Line, but for some reason I thought Sigilyph, not many people would know about it. As soon as I clicked it, I kind of regretted that choice because it was just stupid, of course. Everyone knows Sigilyph. Sigiliph's awesome. Also is a Psychic Flying type, not a Psychic Rock type. But it's a pretty interesting one. I used my undo and undid that Sigilyph and put Oricorio Pau style, which is just a dumb pick. I mean, maybe there should be, on top of the Necrozma forms, maybe study the Oricorio forms, because they have wacky types, and they are genuinely some of the best picks on every grid. I've never seen an Oricorio not be one of the rarest picks. Honestly, I think it's a really like underdeveloped, slept on meta that is really great, and I think is a really great idea to get into. Not much to say there. Psychic, grass, like Calyrex, uh, Psychic grass, Psychic flying, Psychic ground, Psychic, which is Claydol, Psychic, is that all? Grass, flying, ground. Dragon, Psychic dragon, like Ultra Necrozma, and the Lotties, and the Mega Lotties, which is 4, which, you know. Moving on to get me away from the Psychic types is weak to Ice normal. I kind of went with a cop out and went with a normal flying type, which everybody knows, and was actually surprisingly the most picked on the leaderboard. You'll see all these are, Pidgeot or Trumbeak, Dodrio, things like that. But I actually love Cyclizar, a normal dragon type who I ended up using later, but would be weak to ice. There's a million normal flying types out there. You can think of one. I mean, Ursaring, or Ursaluna, sorry, was a normal ground type, and that was a stellar pick. Swablu is a normal, flying type? That's an insane pick. There's some really good picks today. Most popular was Drampa, who I believe is a normal dragon as well. I think it's kind of fun that a normal dragon was the most popular. One thing that hurt a little bit today is that Toucannon is 0.8, and I thought Toucannon would just be a rare version of Trumbeak, but sometimes it hurts to not be a smartass and pick Trumbeak like I did. Again, I know I've said this like 2 times already. If there's anything I could say over studying the Necrozma forms, it's please, please, please study Trumbeak and Toucannon. They're always so rare. They're normal flying, and they're the least common normal flying types. Everyone loves them. Not super complicated. Let's move on to weak to ice electric. This one stings a little bit because, as you can see on my friend's leaderboard, I was 2 points under, and you know what would have got me 2 points under? Picking Fan Rotom, of course, an electric flying type, but I didn't. I picked Mo Rotom, who is a electric grass type, which I guess is just the more obvious ice weakness, or people just don't know that Rotom Air exists. Rotom Air is also one of my most beloved picks because it has Levitate as a flying type, which is so hilarious to me. But electric weak to ice is sort of difficult, but not entirely impossible. There's plenty of electric dragons: Dracozolt, Miraidon, Zekrom, and maybe some more that I can't think of. All electric dragon types. An electric ground type, Sandy Shocks. I adore that pick. There's some really, really fun kind of ways you can get this, and it's one of those things where every pick you see that isn't a super obvious one is a really rare one. There's no real middle ground. It's either, one of the Rotom forms or Zapdos, or it's Tornadus or Oricorio Pom-Poms or Fan Rotom, which is still Rotom, but it's still cool. Sandy Shocks, things like that. That's amazing. I knew Wattrel. I knew Wattrel and Kilowattrel, which probably would have been rarer than Mo Rotom. I made a lot of mistakes today, guys. Maybe I shouldn't play my grids in the morning. This sucked. I don't know why I picked Mo Rotom. It hurts me. This grid just hurts me. Really. I'm just, from all angles, this is just a horrible day. But Electric Ice is a pretty easy one in hindsight. I feel bad saying that in case people didn't get it, but think about it for a while. And I know I did it, but worst comes to worst, if you need to think of an electric type and you need to think of electric type that needs a certain type, Rotom gets Water, Fire, Grass, Ghost, and Flying. That's 5 types. That's 5 electric dual types I just gave you that you can now use for whatever you want. For our final Psychic type, we have Psychic No Evolution line. There's a ton of these. You could go the legendary route. As I say before, I usually kind of default to thinking of legendaries when I think No Evolution line. Articuno, Galar. The Galar birds are one of my favorite legendary trios in the game, specifically the Galarian versions. I mean, I could talk about Galarian Moltres all day. I love them. But there were some really good ones on this grid. I love Calyrex and Calyrex Shadow. I love the Oricorio that I ended up using. I love these, Paradox. Screamtail would have worked. Iron Leaves would have worked. I forget what the Cobalion one's called. Iron Crown, that's what it's called. Iron Boulder would have worked. Really great picks. Necrozma Dawnmane would have worked. Or any of the Necrozma forms, actually. Hoopa and Hoopa Unbound would have worked. They're both psychic, one psychic ghost, one psychic dark. Hoopa Unbound being psychic dark. The Tapu Lele would have worked. I really like these. Mega Mewtwo X, all of them. Mega Mewtwo X, Mega Mewtwo Y, regular Mewtwo. A really fun box. Victini. There's a lot of psychic types that don't evolve. There's a lot of psychic type legendaries. It's a very common theme, and of course our beloved Necrozma has 3, different picks. 4 actually. I forgot regular Necrozma exists. There's 4. I could have put any of the 4 Necrozmas in there, and I didn't think. I'm sorry. Again, I'm sorry. I don't know how many times I can say it. Moving on to normal no evolution line, we have a couple picks. Reggie is probably what everyone immediately defaults to. It's what I did, but I knew better than that. I was actually pretty much proud of myself for thinking Cyclizar, but there are some others. Indeedee female, I just mentioned, is no evolution. It's just Indeedee female and Indeedee male, which are both psychic normal types and 2 forms, so they're inclined to be pretty rare regardless. Komala was a great one. Spinda's a fun one. Chatot, Squawkabilly, Indeedee male, Bouffalant, Audino, Mega Audino, because if I'm not, I forget. No, maybe don't use Mega. I don't remember. I think there's one category that you can use Mega and that doesn't make any sense. But I think Mega Audino might work here. I'm not sure. Regular Audino certainly does, though. There's a lot. I went with Cyclizar. I couldn't tell you how I thought of Cyclizar. It's just one of those things you know. As far as my advice here, I think a normal type with no evolution line that isn't Regigigas. You can think of plenty. And if you've left with anything today, please leave with Indeedee forms. Those are super great. I love the Indeedee forms. They are normal type, and so is Girafarig and Farigiraf. Great. Ursaluna Blood Moon would work, which I'm not expecting you to know, but I'm just naming things off at this point. Let's get to the last box, which is in the same boat. All these no evolution lines are kind of easy. Electric no evolution line. Think of an electric legendary is what most people did, I would say, but when you want to get kind of rare, you get some really interesting ones. Fan Rotom. Any of the Rotoms work, and all of the Rotoms seem to be really rare. Fan Rotom. Paradoxes like Sandy Shocks, Pincurchin, Heat Rotom, Tapu Koko, Iron Thorns. Again, a lot of paradoxes. Raging Bolt would work, but fun PokeGrid trivia here. PokeGrid doesn't have Raging Bolt for some reason. They also don't have Gouging Fire, which you might think, wait, did they just forget the legendary dogs? But they didn't, because they have Walking Wake. I couldn't tell you. That's my little rant. If PokeGrid's listening, please fix that. It drives me crazy. Raging Bolt would have worked. I went with Xurkitree, who is, I believe, the only electric type Ultra Beast. Ultra Beasts are kind of a fun one, because Ultra Beasts are always... Sun and Moon's a very popular game. And I think that knowledge has kind of led me to a lot of really great grids, because it's an important thing to keep in mind. Sun and Moon is a very popular game, but the Ultra Beasts are kind of the least popular part of it, but they're still a little bit popular. So Ultra Beasts are always going to be kind of your middle of the road picks. Like 3% isn't a great percent when the leaderboard's covered in 1s and 2s, but it's not a bad one either. Like for you listening, there's no reason why a 3 isn't great. Like a 3 is a great number. So maybe think of Ultra Beasts. Think of something niche. And maybe if you want to try to ball out, you don't always have to. Like did I think Xurkitree was really going to, break the game? No, right? But I thought of it, and I thought it would do good, and it did good. And, I mean, that makes me happy. A little bit. That didn't make me happy for the psychic types, but I'm over it. I'm also a little mad I didn't think of Mo Rotom, or any other kind of Rotom, after seeing my Mo Rotom pick. Again, weird things like that. I think maybe I do my grid too fast. Try not to do that. It's pretty self-explanatory. A lot of my mistakes, and a lot of your mistakes you'll notice too. Every time I hear a friend talk to me about their mistakes on the grid, they always tell me, I didn't think about it. I hear so often. And sometimes it's a stupid one, like, I thought, why is Sigilyph not a rock type? But other times it's really, why didn't I think of this? Just think. Please think. Think. And what you should think of the most, obviously, is if you see Psychic. Especially if you see Psychic. If you see Psychic, Steel, Dragon, or Ghost, you should think of Necrozma. If you see Psychic, please think of Necrozma. Don't be like me. That's going to be it for today. Grid was pretty fun. I did okay. I was much higher up in the world earlier, but number 86 isn't bad as your host. Certainly would have been better if your host remembered his favorite rule. Study the Necrozma forms, but all jokes aside, a pretty fun day. And that'll be all for episode 6, the October 21st PokeGrid. Study Oricorio, and please, please, please think of Necrozma and study Necrozma as much as you can. I'll see you in the next one.